My name's Rachel.
And I'm Neil.
And today we bring you the story of the Pottery Cottage Murders.
So I heard about this case as a child, well, as a teenager. I remember my granddad talking about it. It must have been one of the anniversaries of the events, you know, in the local paper. But I distinctly remember him talking about it, my granddad and my dad. So it occurred in the Derbyshire Peak District, and from where myself and Rachel live now, it's probably 5 miles away. So we go back to Wednesday, January the 12th, 1977, and Derbyshire, or this area, was experiencing the worst snow in 15 years, apparently. Now, we know the area where these events occurred. Now, I had to drive up, actually, a couple of days ago, and it's kind of very bleak, lonely, and even in summertime, it's a very sort of isolated place. It's predominantly moorland where the pottery cottages are, and with extensions, and it's slightly altered, but it still stands today.
Billy Hughes was 30 years old at the time and was originally from Preston, Lancashire. He had a daughter who was living with his estranged ex-wife in Blackpool. Hughes was first in court at the age of 14 for theft, and by 1977 he had spent half of his life in jail. He was a physically imposing man and spent most of his days in jail bodybuilding. As time went on, he was convicted of increasingly violent offences. One particularly unsavoury incident resulted in him killing 2 police dogs with his bare hands after resisting arrest.
At the time of the incident, Hughes was on remand awaiting trial in Leicester Prison for stabbing someone in the face and rape at knife point. He'd been living in Chesterfield for some time before the alleged offence. Hughes was classed as a low-risk prisoner, not being a danger to others. This was despite 4 convictions.
It just seems absolutely mad that they classed him as a low-risk prisoner. I mean, he literally raped a woman and stabbed somebody in the face. Back to Wednesday, January the 12th, 1977. Having been assessed as a low-risk prisoner, Hughes was transferred via taxi with 2 prison guards from Leicester Prison to Chesterfield Magistrates Court.
I mean, in itself, is that still a thing? I mean,
I hope not.
By taxi. I mean, is it just like a normal?
It's bizarre.
And mini cab? Is it one of the ones with a screen across, or?
And really, using the taxi as a transfer has been described as, and in quotes, madness by Chief Inspector Peter House of Derbyshire Constabulary. So it's not just us that thinks it's absolutely ridiculous.
So at Leicester Prison, I mean, I've driven by Leicester Prison before, and it looks, I suppose, like a lot of prisons, it looks effing grim. So he presumably, as a Category C prisoner, he had more, he had quite a bit of freedom, maybe. He was certainly trusted to work as a kitchen assistant with full access to whatever's in a kitchen, so knives. So unbeknown to anyone at the time, obviously, he'd managed to secrete a knife that he presumably got from the kitchen during his kitchen assistant duties. And during the transfer, he stabbed both prison officers in the neck, which kind of leads to the sort of obvious question is, was he searched? I mean, he would have had to leave the Leicester Prison. He had to go out the kitchen when he was working there, prison, into the taxi, yet he wasn't. I mean, God knows where he had this knife secreted.
Strange. I wonder what he was actually like in prison.
Well, there's very little, from what we can, easily accessible at least, information. Who knows? I mean, presumably transferring him via taxi is indicative that they didn't see him as, a risk, as we've said.
And maybe he was quite manipulative.
Maybe.
If he is kind of verging on more of a kind of a psychopathic trait.
Maybe.
People like that can be quite manipulative and can make friends really, quite easily. And friends for the right reasons, really. So
maybe. I mean,
never know.
I did read somewhere that when he was living in Chesterfield before the alleged offence, let's say, for the rape at knife point and stabbing someone in the head, that he's a regular drinker in, I think it's the area of Brampton in Chesterfield, and by all accounts he was sort of reasonably sociable.
Sounds like a really nice guy.
Well, we'll see. But so he managed to hijack this taxi. Got the taxi driver. He was just a normal everyday taxi driver. He wasn't employed by the prison service. So he got him out, and he got the prison officers out, and then he kind of drove off, and then he eventually crashed it, which will be a kind of a theme, as we'll see.
A reoccurring theme.
Yeah. So if you can imagine the scene, so it's a place called Beeley Moor near Chesterfield. So he ran, jogged, he walked several hours through the driving snow over Beeley Moor, and as I said earlier, it literally is the middle of nowhere, and you wouldn't want to be running out of petrol, on there, whether Billy Hughes is around there or not. So we came across Pottery Cottage. At one end of the three cottages lived Mr. and Mrs. Minton. So Arthur, 72, and his wife Amy, of a similar age. Not sure the age, but it doesn't really matter. Also living there was their 38-year-old daughter, Jill Moran, and her husband, 36-year-old Richard.
We've had a disagreement about how you say that last name. I'm Irish, I say Moran, but Neil seems to think it's Moran.
Yeah, I mean...
But hey-ho.
Yeah. So, middle cottage was empty, and then at the other end were two teachers, Mr. and Mrs. Newman. Richard, he was a sales director of a plastics company in sort of the Chesterfield area, which is still in business today, I believe. Jill was a secretary in Chesterfield. Their daughter, Sarah, who was aged 10, also lived with them.
On arrival at Pottery Cottage, Hughes noticed a couple of axes outside that the family used for chopping wood. He crept into Arthur and Amy Minton's cottage. Amy was preparing dinner for the family at this time. Amy turned around to see Hughes with an axe in his hand, and Hughes quickly reacted and took a 5-inch boning knife from the kitchen drawer and placed it in his pocket.
That's like your worst nightmare, isn't it? Turning around and there's a strange, menacing bloke there with an axe in each hand.
And he is massive as well. And we've had a look at his, pictures. He is a scary looking bloke. He really is.
Yeah, certainly. Well, I mean, I suppose most people would really, wouldn't they, with an axe in each hand? A strange man in your house. So we're not sure exactly how, but Amy and Arthur, they're in the 70s. Mad bloke turns up with an axe in each hand. Probably kind of, appeared quite intimidating. So Jill, she arrived back from work about 3 p.m. She finished at 3 because daughter was at school. She wanted to be at home for daughter when she got back from school. So she arrived in her Hillman imp. If you Google a Hillman imp, my dad used to have one of these, apparently, before I was born. That's by the by. So Jill arrived back. So she came into the house, and then her mum, Amy, said, "This here, this mad fucker here is a man on the run. He's got a knife, but he's promised not to harm us." And then Hughes said something to the effect of, "I've stabbed 2 prison officers. I didn't kill them, but I know how to kill." Sarah then turned up from school, got dropped off outside, presumably the school bus. Must have been outside because, as I say, it's middle of nowhere. She's only 10. So obviously she got in the arse and thought, who's this chap? Jill just said, "Oh, it's just somebody that's broke down in the car," and just said, "Oh, go and play in your room." So Richard, he came back at 5 p.m. and I mean, you just can't imagine this. He was greeted, so he'd come through his front door, day at work, pleased to get home, with the sight of Hughes having a knife to his wife's throat. God only knows what Richard thought at that. He got a flex from a lamp and a washing line to bind the hands and feet of all of them. Arthur, so he's 72, he was angry and he kind of tried to resist, and he told Hughes to get out my ass. First bit of violence here from Hughes. He pushed Arthur to the floor. Arthur struggled to get back up with great difficulty. He had a prosthetic leg.
He's bloody 70 years old,
He's
bless
70
him.
years old, and he's good on him. So they're all then gagged as well. So without difficulty then, Hughes lifted Richard, who I think he says somewhere he was 12 stone, so, fully grown man, and seen a picture of Richard, and he's no, he's not like a particularly small man. So Hughes lifted him on his shoulder, over his shoulder, up the stairs into a room. He did the same then with Amy and with Jill. So they're all in different rooms upstairs. The only person downstairs at this point is Arthur. He was bound and gagged in his armchair in the lounge.
So the situation continued throughout the night until the next day. So the next day, Thursday the 13th of January, a man came actually to empty the septic tank. Jill signed for the job that it was done, and the man that came to do the job didn't really see any signs of any issues, so off he went. Shortly after this, Hughes instructed Jill to ring in sick for her workplace and also to ring Sarah's school explaining that she is ill and won't make it in today.
So having rung up Sarah's school and Jill's work, Hughes then orders Jill to drive into Chesterfield for cigarettes and a newspaper. Although, Jill's going off on her own, he said, don't do anything silly because I've got your family here. Before she went, Jill wanted to know if, can I see Sarah? Can I check she's okay? Hughes said, well, she's okay, but you can't see her now. And we spoke about this, didn't we? We said what would, you can't imagine, can you? But what would we do if you got kind of free rein to kind of go, you're on your own in the car, what would you do? Would you go to the police? Would you tell them? Or would you just think, well, so far Hughes has only, he's pushed Arthur to the floor, but he's not, as far as we know, he's not been violent as yet.
Because it's Jill and Richard that go out on their own to get this stuff from the shop.
I think this is just Jill on her own at this
Jill
point.
on her own.
But either,
So it's Jill on her own going to the shop.
But obviously at home you've got daughter,
yeah, but
husband, mum and dad.
I struggle with that because I would go to the police, but then again, I haven't been in this situation.
Well,
it's hard to make a judgment.
It's it's one of them things, isn't it? It's whatever you choose, you've got to go with, haven't you, there and then. You haven't got kind of three options, see how they all play out. You just got to go with it there and then and decide. And Jill obviously thought...
Well, adrenaline takes over sometimes.
Well, she obviously, she probably thought like, well, I don't know.
Just keep him sweet, he'll bugger off.
Yeah, and he'll fuck off and, and then you can get the police.
Yeah.
It's very easy to criticise, isn't it? So, she eventually returned, and then, about 9:30 that evening, Hughes then told Richard to ring in sick at work. Hughes then, this is... it's quite sort of...
Things just take a bit of a bizarre turn.
Well, he untied Richard, Amy, and Jill, and he asked Jill to can you make some toast and tea, which obviously she did. They actually played cards, read the papers, and it's a weird thing to say, but it's kind of like a relaxing evening. God knows what they were thinking. Probably just keep him sweet.
Possibly the most awkward game of cards ever, though.
Well,
you'd want to make sure he wins.
He wins, yeah. Richard had a Chrysler 180. Now, no idea what this car was, so I had to Google it. And really, the thing that I would describe it is if it was kind of like a 1970s version of a businessman's or like a rep's Ford Mondeo equivalent sort of thing. So Hughes wanted to go out for a test drive in it. So Hughes, Richard and Amy
off they go.
Went out in the car and then Hughes announced that he wanted to go and see a friend in Sutton in Ashfield, which is approximately about probably 20 miles away, something like that. And he said he needed to give this friend, this mate, proceeds from a past robbery that they'd done together.